I think we're talking about the East all wrong, Mike.
Mm.
Everyone wanted to end up on the Pistons side of the bracket. Meanwhile, I look at how the playoff bracket played out. The Pistons ended up with the easiest path to the conference finals. And we're not talking about the Pistons that way. They're only going to have to play one of Boston or New York to make the NBA finals. And I think their best matchups of all the playoff teams ended up on their side of the bracket. And I started thinking about this because I was reading a column by Kurt Goldsberry, and he had two stats that jumped out. 20 of this century's 26 NBA champions ranked in the top 4 in net rating. So that's the Thunder, the Spurs, the Pistons, and the Celtics for this year. That means that those teams have at least an overwhelming chance to make the conference finals. So you start there. And then this other stat. Since 2000, teams that have ranked in the top 4 net rating have won their first round series 88.1% of the time, which brings us to Charlotte. And everybody was looking at, okay, if Charlotte beats Orlando and the Hornets end up in this 8th seed against Detroit, there's going to be a lot of NBA Twitter hipsters picking the Hornets for this series. I guarantee you that. History shows that it might be competitive, but the Hornets are not going to win that series. And I thought, look, that play-in game against Miami, the Hornets' offense has been great all season, but I thought they showed that they could be limited by a really physical defense that's dialed in. And the Pistons are going to be a physical defense that is dialed in. LaMelo Ball was it was a weird game for him. Con Knipples really struggled in that game. I love the Charlotte Hornets. I think it's a great story. I'm not sure they're ready for this moment in particular, especially against the number 1 team that's going to kick the snot out of you from the beginning of the game. I like the Pistons quite a bit in that first round series. And then after that, it would be the winner of Cleveland versus Cleveland or Toronto, right? The winner of that series. You're playing them in the second round. And I think the Cavs are going to be favored in that series. And there's this idea that the Cavs are this great shooting team. They're closer to average this season. And that's even when you look at their stats when their guys are back. The Pistons are obviously, that's their weakness, but I don't know that the Cavs are that team that's going to necessarily jump on them in terms of that weakness. I think those margins aren't going to be as wide, in other words, as they need to be for Cleveland in order to win that series. The Cavs also run a ton of pick and roll. And you can make a strong argument with the data that the Pistons are the best team in guarding the pick and roll in the entire NBA. And then you look at the other end, I'm like, who's guarding Cade on the Cavaliers? Like, who's guarding Cade? I don't see the right matchup there. So I think the bracket broke the right way for the Pistons. And I think if you're Boston or New York or any other team on the other side of that bracket for that matter, I would be preparing to play Detroit in the Eastern Conference Finals.
Man, so that's interesting, but I really want to start at the microist level that you just brought up, which is like, who would guard Cade on the Cavs? And I don't think that JB Bickerstaff would do that, but man, I would love to see Evan Mobley just take that assignment from the jump and like, let's do something crazy and let's throw it out there. So there are some points in your favor, right? Like, I think definitely the Pistons are undefeated against the Hornets this season. They won they won all 3 games that they played. And I think maybe one was kind of close, but they just don't, to your point, the Hornets, for all as fun as they've been this year, they don't match up particularly well with just like the raw, slavering, rabid physicality that the Pistons bring. And very few
teams. Thompson, you got Ron Holland, like a bunch of Cade Cunningham's a good defender. Like these guys can guard all of those wings.
Yeah. They're like no team except for maybe like last year's Thunder. No team in recent memory has had the perimeter defenders that Detroit has this season, and it's going to make them just a beast to deal with if you don't have like a front court scoring option.
Yeah, there was a big stretch of the season where the Pistons were actually turning opponents over at a higher rate than the Thunder were last year, and that's all we talked about with OKC last year. Is you can't get the ball across against them. They're going to turn you over every time. The Pistons were even better at that for a large portion of this season.
Yeah, and it's even more interesting when you think about it because the Thunder, at least, like their guys are enabled to take more chances because they have great cleanup guys on the back. Like Chet Holmgren is going to be second in Defensive Player of the Year most likely, and Isaiah Hartenstein is a good defender as well. And it's like Jalen Duren has taken a lot of strides this season. We've talked about some of them on this podcast in the past, but he's not nearly the level of mistake eraser that OKC has, which means that Detroit's guys, generally speaking, need to be a little bit more sound, a little more calculated with their gambles because they can't afford to just like go for a steal and then get blown by, not to the degree that the Thunder have. So the fact that they're able to cause this much chaos anyway is like very impressive. So like Detroit, love Detroit. I think that they are very well equipped to annihilate basically everybody that they're going to face. But I just think that like Cleveland, Detroit will be interesting. They were 2-2 during the real season. I think I am not quite.
Donovan Mitchell missed a couple of those games too.
Yeah, and I'm not quite as like willing to dismiss Cleveland's matchups with Detroit. Like I think that Cleveland, when they are at their best, and they're actually like for the first time basically all year, they're actually pretty healthy right now. I think we're going to see them come out maybe a little more strongly than people expect. If you've been watching the Cavs this year and you're like, oh, the 4 seed, they've kind of underperformed. Because remember, people thought Cleveland was going to run away with the conference this year to start. That never really happened for a variety of reasons. And I mentioned earlier how they're kind of House of Cardi sometimes, where if one guy's hurt, then the whole thing kind of falls apart. But they're not really right now. And as long as they're going to be healthy, Cleveland's going to be a tough out for anybody. I think I would still pick Detroit over Cleveland, but I wouldn't feel that confident about it. And
so
then
it'll take a Big Mac Strus series, I think, right? You're going to need like the best version of Strus, who is a good 3-point shooter, but slightly overrated, right? You look at his career numbers, you're like, you expect him to be like 40% from three. He's not. He's a lot closer to like 36. And then you've got the Sam Merrill part of this, where obviously you're going to try to put him out there. Sam Merrill's not a bad defender, but he doesn't match up well against Detroit, right? It feels like the Pistons have a bunch of guys that can kind of pin him under the basket and go to work. I don't know. Every time I kind of slice it, I'm like, it'll take a monster series from like Cleveland's front court, I think, to maybe tip the scales, where I think a lot of people would look at the 3-point shooting for Cleveland and say that's what's going to tip the scales. And I'm just not as bullish. And by the way, one of our first good take episodes, my whole thing was Cleveland's going to be fine. I just think that the Pistons are better. And I wonder if we're looking at the wrong part of the Cavaliers system in terms of the 3-point shooting as their ultimate advantage, where I think they're going to have to find advantages elsewhere.
Yeah, I think that is fair. But I still think like if we're talking easiest path to the conference finals, like OKC has to be brought up right here. Like nothing could have broken better for Oklahoma City than the way it has. Like no Denver in the first 2 rounds, no San Antonio in the first 2 rounds. They don't even have to play the Clippers. Like you and I had talked previously yesterday about like how a Clippers first round matchup against OKC would at least be like a little interesting. Like not that anyone would pick the Clippers to win, but they would make OKC work a little bit. Like, no, Golden State looked awesome last night. Not to try to take anything away from them, but they're not a good matchup with just the sheer youth and athleticism that OKC brings. Like that's going to go very badly, I think, for Golden State, if in fact Golden State is the team that emerges. And like Phoenix is a good, strong team. They just also don't match up well with OKC. I think like who on Phoenix is going to like, I just think Devin Booker's game is more based on like guile and power now, rather than like this like really silky way to get to the rim. And I think that OKC has so many people who can guard him effectively. And I'm really worried about Phoenix's ability to score in that series. And then the second round.
And when teams trap Devin Booker, it gets really rough in Phoenix. And you know that OKC is just going to do that from the tip.
Yeah. Like they might not even let Devin Booker try to score, to your point. Like, there's a lot of ways that OKC can attack Phoenix, and there are very few that Phoenix can attack OKC in the first round. And the second round is going to be either this broken down Lakers team, right, which would be surprising in its own right, or Houston, who at least is athletic and kind of meet OKC at that level. They're not going to get literally run off the court, but despite their kind of like hot streak at the end of the season, you know, we're 3 weeks away from people saying that Houston was the biggest sham of a franchise and talking about them the way I just talked about the Magic. You know, like I don't have a lot of faith in Houston to put up a super strong fight against OKC either. And then it's like there's a real chance that the Thunder play 8 games in a month, and they're just sitting there waiting for the Spurs and Nuggets to just blast each other into smithereens, and whichever of those two limps into the finish line gets blasted in the conference finals too. So I'm nervous about it. I like, if you're a Thunder fan, this whole last few weeks could not have gone better for you. Everything has broken OKC's way. It's unbelievable.
All right, so here's my counter.
They're even going to get the Clippers pick now because the Clippers are going to go into the lottery. So there's even a chance that the Thunder are going to get a huge draft pick. You know, like it's crazy.
So my counter to the Thunder having the easiest path over the Pistons, I think some of this is baked into the fact that the Thunder are the Thunder, and they're clearly the best team.
Yeah. Right.
Would you rather face, if you were the Oklahoma City Thunder, would you rather face Houston or Cleveland in the second round? I think you would rather face Cleveland.
I disagree. I think Cleveland's better. I think Houston is a team that we'll see. Like Houston, I was high on Houston entering the year. They have not met my expectations, but I get the sense from Houston they're sort of a team that when they get punched first, they don't always punch back. You know, like I think
that's fair.
And part of that comes from like weird dynamics amongst all the top players. Like the coach, like Ime Udoka hates Alperen Şengün for reasons that nobody has ever quite understood. Kevin Durant apparently hates the whole team. And even though the Rockets have been very good about maintaining solidarity and not letting cracks show on the surface and stuff like that, there's no way that doesn't have a negative impact in the locker room. And more importantly, there's no way that's not going to have a negative impact in crunch time of like a tight game in game 4 of a must-win, 2-1 series or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, Houston, we forget, they played Oklahoma City really well last regular season. We were kind of talking about the Rockets in a similar way, not quite, but in a similar way as we talked about the Spurs this year. It's like, oh, wow, look at their performance against the Thunder in the regular season. They don't want to Meanwhile, they lose to the Warriors in that first round in a 7-game series. So we never really get any chance at Houston OKC, which would have been in the conference finals last year. But we never see that. Their size is interesting. Their ability to deploy a lot of perimeter defenders on Shea is interesting to me. Now, obviously, no Fred VanVleet, no Steven Adams is really a killer for them. If they had those guys, we're talking about, I think, just in general, a different Rockets team. But
there's just not enough ball handling, I think.
There's not enough ball handling.
Yeah, that's what it comes down to.
Yeah, I mean, Oklahoma City is just going to rush them.
Yeah, I do like the fact that they have the athletes to throw at Shea, and like Jalen Williams still isn't quite himself. Like I do think Houston can cause some problems, but I think if OKC really dials up the on-ball pressure, like we know Kevin Durant's had problems with double teams all season, and like even if he successfully gets the ball out of his hands, like Reed Shepherd, I think his handle is a lot weaker than people realize. Like I think he's going to have problems if he's getting a lot of ball pressure. Thompson isn't ready for that kind of heavy load. Like who's going to just be like getting the offense set up and stuff like that. If Thunder really want to start picking up at half court or higher, like it's going to be really hard for Houston's offense to get set. And without Steven Adams cleaning up all their misses, like right. I would have said, just jack a 40-foot 3-pointer every time and hope you get the offensive rebound. That would have been a great strategy 3 months ago, but without Adams, that's not going to work.
And we've seen teams double Durant at half court and get the ball out of his hands that way. And and you know that the Thunder will do that too. And Ime Udoka's counter was at the time nothing. And then eventually got to the Reed Shepherd part of it. It's like, well, we're just gonna have Reed Shepherd play. We'll just like basically line up next to Durant. That way you can't help off of him. And then that worked. And then they like, well, I'm glad that worked. We're just never gonna do that again. And then went back to Tari Eason, whose entire strategy is like, I'm just gonna mean mug you into doing what I want you to do. Is sort of the idea there. So very just strange things in Houston.
Big series for Udoka though, man. He's got to make some noise this playoffs. Like I think that's a guy who's had a lot of surprisingly hot seat right now.
I think you're right. I was kind of thinking about this the other day. Like, who's the coach who you might like? We saw Tom Thibodeau get fired last year, and that was like a little surprising at the time. I could see maybe Ime being a surprise coach who gets fired if they don't get to where they want to go, and if ownership and the general manager are like, look, we really like Alperen Şengün. We kind of hate that you hate Alperen Şengün. We got to get somebody in here who actually likes Alperen Şengün. He's one of those guys that I have my eye on.